our Schwaps Collection. We are going over our 84 Volkswagen Rabbit GTI with a VR6 Turbo. The donor car for this build was a 98 GTI, 2.8 liter 12 valve VR6. The subframe, steering rack, engine, transmission, everything was brought over, and then it was all adapted to work with a set of D2 Mark I coilovers. Started in on the turbo build a few years back. I wanted to use my CNC mill that I had just recently put together, and I wanted ITBs on a VR6 just to experience what it was going to be like. As the ITB build started, I realized that there was just too much room in this car to not turbocharge it. And once the turbo's in place, I didn't want a lot of boost. It's a Rabbit. It doesn't weigh that much. Traction is definitely a challenge. So rather than sticking with my original plan of low boost, I took advantage of the open space, intercooled it, and I've run up upwards of 25 pounds of boost since then on this car. Ended up having to convert it from little 15-inch wheels with 195 tires up to a set of Audi TT 17s with some 235s on them, and it still spins tires. The turbo build was based around wanting to learn how to tune and use a Megasquirt ECU. With the help of my brother, we put together an MS3 with the expansion board and was able to have the capacity for sequential fuel injection and spark. For the turbo build and ITBs, I went with a locally sourced Turbonetics Super 60. The little turbo is great. The sound is awesome. You guys will hear plenty in this video. It just spools nice. I complemented the Turbonetics Turbo with a tile external 38mm wastegate. Then I started in on the ITBs. I bought two sets of Triumph Motorcycle throttle bodies. There were 3 per throttle body. Bought 2 sets of those and started catting up an intake manifold that's not equal length runners. I was not even going to attempt to achieve that. I think I tried for it, but there was just no way to fit it with my sizing and space constraints and my capacity at the time to get equal length on the ITBs. It also has the fact that VR6s have unequal length runners inside the head, so fighting for one equal length and not length compensating was worthless. So I built the manifold I built a jig to weld it all together, and got what we have here, and it's awesome. And the throttle response is just like nothing else.
I wanted to jump in here and go in a little more detail on these ITBs because while it works really well, it was very complicated to get going. I ended up having to drive one of the throttle body sets off of the other one, and to do that, the cable pull, which is normally an eccentric, had to be set up on the slave throttle body as just a one-to-one pull. So I set up on the main master set to have a eccentric pull from the pedal and a one-to-one pull from it to the other throttle body. And by doing this, it worked really well. It just was a bit of a challenge to actually do the machining on it since it was such little pieces that had to kind of lock together and then drive the throttle bodies. But I got it working, as you can see here. Once I had the throttle cables pulling and both sets of throttle bodies opening, the next challenge to overcome was the boost plenum. When you do ITBs, you don't really have an intake manifold, so you used a boost plenum to get the charged air into the cylinders. On this car, I used a Lexan window to kind of show off the machine work and the throttle bodies themselves. Sadly, that Lexan did not last as long as I was hoping it would. It ended up breaking after a few years, and I ended up going to just a solid aluminum panel to replace it. The challenge didn't stop there, though. I ended up having to get a vacuum reference from the post-throttle body pre-valve area. That's where you actually have your vacuum. Well, each of these throttle bodies had a small adjustment screw that was used to even up the idle vacuum on the Triumph motorcycles. I use these as my ports to feed the vacuum from each cylinder into a collective manifold that then has the map sensor plumbed into it and an idle air control valve plumbed into it as well. Once I had all that done, the last step was injectors. I decided to run 42-pound injectors, and I machined up a pre-extruded fuel rail, but then I had to machine up the bungs to actually get the injectors into the intake manifold. Since I knew the angle and since I had done the CAD work, I was actually able to machine every piece of it and got what you see here.
The tune on this car is insane. It has Megasport allows you multiple fueling tables. They can be all additive and multiplicative. I ended up using a mass airflow sensor, a map sensor, and throttle position just to get me 3 tables that blended together to give what we're driving today. And it works really well, but it was complicated, that's to say the least. With the ITBs and a boost plenum built, the car was running. It took a long time to get it from just running to actually driving well due to so many other issues when it comes to building a fully custom car. This car, I adapted, you'll see a raised shifter while converting to an O2J, which is just the later model 5-speed that Volkswagen had, which is a much better shift feel using a floating ball shifter. It's just a much better setup. I raised it up to give it a nice close positioning to the steering wheel, and it's awesome. It's so much fun having the shifter just that close. It's very race car-esque, and for just this goofy little street car, it's wonderful. I wanted to convert to some racing seats and built some brackets that I welded into the chassis and put these corbus you see here. With the build of this car, we were having some issues with the original setup using the hydraulic clutch. For this build, I went ahead and got an OBP pedal box built specifically for the Mark I. It's meant to fit at the angle of the firewall, and it does fit at the angle, but it took some getting used to figure out how to comfortably have your ankles sit in the way they do. But once you're good at it, the heel toe is amazing. Manual brakes give you such a response to them that it makes it so easy to actually just do a heel toe shift. You can just pop up right to that throttle pedal while on the brake, and it's awesome. So with the pedal assembly done, I ran all new brake lines in the car. I had the motor set up with the throttle bodies and the turbo kit. I wanted to try to get some weight off the front of a Rabbit. They're not the best balance from the get-go. So when you add in a VR6 that's lean forward, you're just adding extra weight and just not helping anything. So I moved the radiator to the back of the car. To do that, I made a remote thermostat housing. I modified the infamously breaking crack pipe on the car with a billet one to output some AN fittings for this remote thermostat housing. Ran the coolant lines through the cabin of the car and have the radiator sitting right behind me right now with a little cover on it to help direct the airflow and get it out of the back of the car. Having built Fieros and dealt with a 4-cylinder radiator that can keep up with a V8 or a Turbo 6 or even a high horsepower built 4-cylinder, I was so confused when it came to actually building a rear radiator setup, thinking keeping the heat away from the motor, you would have so much more efficiency. Well, it turns out it works the other way. It's just the fact that the air's at the front that gives so much of the efficiency that by going mid-engine, you're gaining even more heat transferring. When you do it the other way around, my oil temps stay great, just from the block being cooled by the airflow. But I had to upgrade my radiator size 2 or 3 times of what I expected it. So I'm running a small block Ford 3-inch core humongous radiator in the back of this thing just to keep it cool. Along with doing the rear mounted radiator, I went ahead and cut out the rear spare tire well, and I got rid of the original gas tank location and went to a fuel cell where I built my own little dual pump bracket that's sitting right behind the passenger seat here. It was a fun project to test on the CNC mill. The other reasoning behind the fuel cell was factory Mark 1s are external The car itself is an 84 GTI, which is a square headlight car. But when I bought it, it had already been converted to round headlights. And honestly, when I got it, it had a clipper body kit on it, and I hated it. It's just my opinion. I know some people love them. The cabriolets came with them from time to time, and it's kind of what some people like. It just was not for me. So I got that body kit off day one and got it down to just the bare essence of a Rabbit. When I decided to do the big wheels and tires to help with the traction and give a little more weight for the inertia factor, again with traction, I decided that I didn't want the car to sit super tall, even though I was putting 17s with proper size tires on them. So I actually flipped the strut mounts on the coilovers to basically drop the car 3 or 4 more inches, but then by adding the big wheels and tires, it raised it back up. So with lowering the car that much, I basically ended up channeling it. I raised the wheel line while lowering the body and keeping everything else the same. This car's got a reinforced oil pan just in case it gets low enough, and it has saved me one very significant time when I pulled off the side of a road and found a semi-truck ditch and bottomed the car out on the pan and actually stuck it on the pan. I'll show you guys some pictures of that because it was a comical experience on how to get yourself out when you have an open diff and you have one wheel in the air because your oil pan's holding your whole car up. It's an exciting time. When the bigger wheels and tires went on, it actually widened the car 2 or 3 inches on each side. And because I raised the wheel well line, it actually got to the point where I was already cutting out when the car was starting to skinny up, which if you ever look at the side of a Golf, you'll see that it widens out to the molding and then it tucks back in. Well, I was cutting through that, so I had to get flares that could cover that distance. And they were 4-inch flares that I needed. I actually found them in Poland and had them shipped here. I got a really good deal on them, and they're just plastic bolt-on flares that were big enough that actually fit the width of the new wheels and tires. So this car is running a 3-inch exhaust system with the turbo all the way back with a single Borla muffler at the rear of it, and it sounds awesome. Doesn't completely sound like a VR6 given the short runners and the ITBs, but it has a unique sound and I've learned to love it. I'm such a stickler when it comes to VR6 sounds. I want it a certain way and I don't know how to achieve it, so you'll see with all my builds I kind of fight for that exact sound without giving up all the effort I've put into making something unique that took away the sound. Turbo ITBs, you don't sound like a VR anymore. You sound like something completely different, but still sound good. So this car does have 98 GTI front rotors and calipers and rear calipers, but I have adapted Mark IV rotors to fit over custom spindles on the stub axles in the back. When fitting this pedal box, it actually ends up pushing you quite a bit farther back in the car, so I'm sitting a lot deeper than most Mark I seating position is. And when you add that to the fact that I was building custom seat brackets for these Corbus, I was able to position myself wherever I wanted, but it did require a very deep set custom steering wheel with an adapter on it to even make it deeper set. And if you've never dealt with an aftermarket steering wheel, one of the things that you don't think about is how far away your blinkers and headlights and washer wiper stalks are. You can't easily reach it with just sticking a finger out. You actually have to reach for them. So oftentimes if you're using a blinker, you're not even holding the wheel anymore. You have to hold it with your other hand and reach for them. For gauges on this car, I found this Koso aftermarket motorcycle speedometer, tachometer, temp sensor, gas gauge combo unit. I love it. It has this really cool sweep and start. The There's LED bar graph that follows the tachometer sweep. It gives all priority to the tachometer over the speedometer. The speedometer is just a digital readout, and I just love it. It's such a cool little touch. Makes it that much more race car. I do have an AEM wideband. I much prefer the AEM widebands from all the builds I've done so far. Just personal preference on that. And then I've got a Turbo Smart boost gauge. And you're gonna have to see a clip of this boost gauge. When you end up having ITBs with a little vacuum manifold and everything to it, it's not a steady system. People have joked when seeing it that the needle's just gonna break off one of these days. And so far, we're at almost 10,000 miles on this build, and it's holding steady, wiggling like crazy all the time. Since it does get fairly cold here in Missouri, I did go ahead and put a heater core in the car. I like to allow for just some airflow. When I first had this car, it had HVAC delete, it had no dash, it had so many components missing from it that I kind of added it in my own race car style. So what I have here is a vintage air heater unit that has been flipped upside down, and the defrost is now actually used as the blower on you, and what was the heater for your feet is now set to aim right at the windshield and do a defrost feature. Thanks for joining me, guys, on this ride-along video. If you like what you saw, please consider giving the video a thumbs up. If you got any questions, comment below. I reply to all the comments, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. But that's it for now, so we'll catch you next time.